Just one day after the shocking deaths of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, the world was left in stunned disbelief. The initial reports were chilling, but when a leaked autopsy report surfaced, the full extent of the tragedy became even clearer. The report, prepared by Dr. Jonathan Lucas and his team at the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office, revealed that both Rob and Michelle had suffered multiple fatal injuries. These injuries were not random or accidental. They were precise, swift, and carried out with a level of intensity that left even seasoned investigators deeply disturbed. Rob Reiner had sustained several fatal wounds to his neck, chest, and torso, each one powerful and deliberate. Michelle, discovered nearby in the kitchen, had similar injuries, inflicted in a way that suggested both efficiency and intent. While the initial media coverage focused on Nick Reiner, who was quickly arrested and widely portrayed as the primary suspect, investigators began to notice discrepancies that did not entirely fit the story of a spontaneous act of rage. The police observed gaps in the timeline and inconsistencies at the crime scene that suggested something more complex might have occurred. The entire Brentwood home, which had been a symbol of warmth, intellect, and private family life, had become the site of an unimaginable tragedy. Emergency services had been called in the afternoon, a seemingly ordinary day in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. When authorities entered the home, they were met not with life-threatening emergencies, but with an eerie, unsettling silence. The halls and rooms that had once been filled with laughter and conversation now stood frozen, almost as if the life that had once filled the home had quietly departed. Rob was discovered in the living room, Michelle in the kitchen, with injuries suggesting a swift and targeted attack. The kitchen knife used to inflict the wounds was an ordinary household item, a tool Michelle would often use to prepare meals for her family, now transformed into the weapon of a devastating crime. Blood traces were visible on the counter and floor, marking the final, desperate moments of struggle. The scene was orderly in many ways. Furniture had not been overturned, and there were no signs of a prolonged struggle. Everything suggested that the attack had been fast, controlled, and carried out with alarming efficiency. Investigators could not ignore the questions that arose from the scene. How had the attacker moved so quickly and effectively? Why had there been no calls for help? Did Michelle attempt to react, or was Rob's effort to intervene tragically cut short? These unanswered questions added layers of mystery and suspense to an already horrifying case. As news outlets reported on Nick Reiner's arrest, speculation about motive and family dynamics quickly dominated headlines. Many focused on past conflicts and assumed a personal vendetta had led to the tragedy. However, forensic experts pointed out inconsistencies in the evidence that did not align neatly with the narrative of a spontaneous act of anger. The careful, efficient nature of the wounds suggested planning or premeditation. The locations of the victims, their proximity to each other, and the absence of signs of frantic struggle all contributed to a sense that something more complex had occurred than initially reported. The autopsy report would later confirm these observations in clinical detail. Both Rob and Michelle had died from acute blood loss caused by multiple penetrating injuries. In Rob's case, the injuries were concentrated around vital areas of the body, including the neck and chest. Michelle's injuries were similarly severe. The wounds had been inflicted quickly, leaving little opportunity for the victims to defend themselves or cry out for help. The medical examination noted that the knife used had been sharp and applied with force, creating deep, precise cuts. Dr. Lucas and his team emphasized the efficiency and speed of the attack, noting that such precision indicated a highly controlled act rather than one driven purely by impulsive rage. These details, combined with the observations at the crime scene, raised questions about whether Nick Reiner had acted alone or whether other forces might have been involved. While the autopsy confirmed the cause of death and the severity of the injuries, it did not provide answers to many of the critical questions investigators and the public were asking. The tragedy was not just a story of loss, but a case of mystery and suspense, leaving everyone involved to wonder about the deeper circumstances surrounding the events in the Reiner's home. The victim's daughter, Romy, became an accidental witness to the aftermath, discovering her parents' bodies and facing a trauma that would have long-lasting emotional effects. The combination of family grief, public attention, and the shocking nature of the crime created a situation that was both heartbreaking and deeply puzzling. While the world speculated about motives and suspects, investigators worked to piece together the timeline, examine the physical evidence, and understand the sequence of events that led to this horrific day. The autopsy report would become a central element in this effort, providing clear, scientific evidence of how both victims had died, yet leaving unanswered the questions of why it happened and who was ultimately responsible. The tragedy of the Reiners is a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, and how even familiar spaces, filled with love and warmth, can become the stage for unimaginable horror. The Brentwood home of Rob and Michelle Reiner, once known for its intellectual atmosphere and welcoming environment, now stood as a silent witness to tragedy. On December 14, 2025, emergency services received a call that seemed routine at first, but the scene that awaited them was anything but ordinary. Police found Rob Reiner in the living room and Michelle in the kitchen, each suffering from fatal injuries that had been inflicted quickly and with precision. Investigators immediately noted that the usual signs of a struggle were largely absent. Furniture remained in place, and there were no overturned objects or evidence of extended physical conflict. The rapidity and efficiency of the attack raised questions that went beyond the initial narrative of a sudden eruption of personal anger. How could such violence occur without leaving clear signs of struggle? Was the attacker experienced, controlled, and deliberate in their movements? These questions would later drive much of the investigation. The knife, an ordinary household item used daily for meal preparation, was found near Michelle, indicating that the murder weapon had been readily available. Investigators noted the seeming contradiction. How could such a common object become the instrument of a calculated and devastating act? Was it a moment of opportunity, or had the weapon been intentionally chosen in advance? The autopsy report provided additional clarity while maintaining the sense of mystery. Conducted by Dr. Jonathan Lucas and his team, the examination confirmed that both victims had died from acute blood loss due to penetrating injuries. Rob Reiner had sustained multiple fatal wounds, each one sharp, deep, and targeted at vital areas. Michelle's injuries were equally severe. The report noted that the injuries were delivered quickly and efficiently, leaving no time for defense. In the aftermath of the crime, investigators examined the home in meticulous detail. Every room, hallway, and corner was searched for evidence. Despite the apparent precision of the attack, questions remained about the sequence of events. How did the attacker move through the home? Why were there no defensive actions recorded? Could there have been more than one person involved? And if Nick Reiner was the primary suspect, what role did past family dynamics play in this tragedy? The media coverage was swift and sensational, emphasizing Nick's arrest and the history of family conflict, yet experts cautioned against drawing conclusions too quickly. Forensic evidence suggested that the crime might have been more complex than initial reports indicated. While emotional responses dominated the public conversation, investigators focused on reconstructing the events and understanding the physical and temporal evidence left behind. One of the most striking elements of the crime was the speed with which it occurred. The injuries, the positioning of the victims, and the absence of a chaotic struggle all pointed to a calculated and efficient act. The autopsy report reinforced this, documenting the number, location, and severity of each wound. The report described the wounds as clean and forceful, indicating that a sharp instrument had been used with precision. These findings contrasted with the often chaotic nature of violent incidents, suggesting that the attacker had either planned the act or possessed exceptional skill in carrying it out. Investigators also noted the psychological elements implied by the crime scene. The use of a common household knife, the absence of chaos, and the careful placement of the victims all suggested a level of control over the environment and the victims that went beyond a simple act of anger. It raised difficult questions about motive, premeditation, and the possible involvement of others in orchestrating the events. The discovery of the victims' bodies had profound emotional impacts on their family and the wider community. Romy, the couple's daughter, inadvertently became a witness to the aftermath, encountering a reality that would have long-lasting effects on her emotional and psychological well-being. The combination of trauma, public scrutiny, and intense media speculation made the investigation highly sensitive and complex. While autopsy reports provided scientific and factual clarity regarding the cause of death, they could not answer the deeper questions that haunted both the investigators and the public. How did the attack unfold so quickly? Was this the act of a single individual, or part of a more complicated scenario? And ultimately, what forces led to the deaths of two people who had once lived in what appeared to be a safe, private, and loving environment? These questions lingered as authorities continued to examine the physical evidence, interview witnesses, and reconstruct the events of that fateful day. The investigation highlighted the fragile balance between human life, trust, and vulnerability. Even in spaces that seem secure, tragedy can strike without warning, leaving those left behind to grapple with grief, confusion, and a profound sense of loss. The autopsy report, while confirming the medical details, became only one part of a broader investigation that sought to uncover not just how the Reiners died, but why. As the investigation unfolded, the details of the autopsy report became central to understanding the tragedy. Dr. Jonathan Lucas and his team emphasized the precision and severity of the injuries, noting that both Rob and Michelle Reiner had died from multiple, penetrating wounds that caused rapid blood loss. Rob's injuries included deep, clean cuts to the neck, chest, and upper torso, suggesting that the attacker had acted swiftly and decisively. Michelle's injuries, inflicted with the same level of efficiency, were consistent with a sudden, lethal attack. These findings confirmed what investigators had suspected from the crime scene. The attack was fast, controlled, and devastating. Beyond the medical details, investigators also focused on the physical evidence and the sequence of events within the home. the absence of signs of a prolonged struggle, the positioning of the victims, and the presence of a common kitchen knife all suggested that the attack had been planned or executed with unusual skill. The investigators faced difficult questions. Was Nick Reiner acting alone, or had someone else orchestrated the events from the shadows? Could a personal dispute explain the precision and speed of the attack, or were other motives involved? The answers were not immediately clear. The media, meanwhile, amplified the narrative of a family conflict, often presenting assumptions as facts. Headlines focused on Nick Reiner's arrest and the history of familial tensions, creating public pressure and a sense of urgency around the case. Yet forensic experts reminded everyone that assumptions could not replace evidence. The autopsy report, while definitive about the cause of death, did not clarify motive or sequence of events. Investigators returned to the crime scene repeatedly, analyzing every detail. The careful layout of the home, the way the victims were found, and the absence of chaos all pointed toward a controlled act. Even small traces, such as blood patterns and knife placement, offered clues that were critical in reconstructing the events. While the autopsy confirmed the immediate cause of death, it was the combination of medical, physical, and circumstantial evidence that would ultimately guide the investigation. The emotional impact on the Reiner family and the wider community was immense. Romy, as the unintended witness, faced the psychological trauma of discovering her parents' bodies. Friends, colleagues, and the public struggled to reconcile the image of the Reiners as a loving, private couple with the violence that had occurred in their home. In addition to the emotional aftermath, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together timelines, interview witnesses, and evaluate evidence in an effort to answer the questions that remained unanswered. How did the attack occur with such speed and precision? Why were there no signs of defensive struggle? Was the household knife simply a tool of convenience, or was its placement deliberate? And ultimately, if Nick Reiner was not solely responsible, who else might have been involved? Each of these questions required careful examination, with the autopsy report serving as a critical, factual foundation for further investigation. While the case drew intense public attention, law enforcement remained focused on gathering evidence and analyzing details methodically. Every piece of information, from autopsy findings to physical traces at the scene, was carefully considered. The tragedy of the Reiners serves as a chilling reminder that violence can strike anywhere, even in familiar and seemingly safe environments. Despite the clarity of the medical findings, many questions about motive, planning, and the sequence of events remained unanswered. This combination of factual certainty and lingering mystery created a narrative that was both compelling and deeply unsettling. Ultimately, the deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner highlight the fragility of life, the unpredictability of tragedy, and the complexity of human behavior. The autopsy report confirms what everyone already feared, yet it also emphasizes what investigators continue to seek: a full understanding of how and why this devastating crime occurred. In the weeks and months that followed, forensic analysis, witness statements, and investigative work continued in the hope of uncovering the truth. While the autopsy provides clarity on the medical aspects, it leaves open questions about motive, premeditation, and the involvement of others. As the investigation moves forward, the combination of detailed medical evidence and careful crime scene analysis remains essential to piecing together the full story. The tragedy, while devastating, also serves as a sobering lesson about the unexpected dangers that can strike even the most secure and private homes. Rob and Michelle Reiner, remembered for their warmth, intellect, and family life, became the victims of a sudden, violent, and perplexing act, leaving behind unanswered questions and a legacy of grief, investigation, and reflection for everyone connected to them. Jason Reiner, a highly respected filmmaker, known for his award-winning movies and dedication to social causes, was found dead under circumstances that shocked everyone who knew him or followed his career. He had spent decades in the film industry, building a reputation for creativity, dedication, and a larger-than-life personality that made him not just a public figure, but someone whose life was often looked up to by fans, colleagues, and aspiring filmmakers alike. On the morning of December 14th, authorities were called to his home after reports of an unusual and concerning situation. The preliminary findings from the scene indicated that something violent had occurred, and initial investigations immediately suggested the need for a thorough autopsy to understand exactly what had transpired. When the autopsy was conducted, it revealed details that were both startling and heartbreaking. According to the preliminary report, Jason had no clear defensive wounds, which means he had little to no opportunity to defend himself during the incident. The only marks on his body were minor abrasions, suggesting either a sudden, unexpected confrontation or an attempt to shield someone else. The absence of serious medical conditions or prior health issues made the situation even more perplexing, as there was no natural explanation for his sudden death. Dr. Jonathan Clark, the lead pathologist overseeing the examination, noted that in his decades of experience, he had rarely encountered such a case involving a well-known public figure. The wounds he described indicated a short but intense episode of violence, leaving Jason virtually no time to respond. Beyond the physical findings, there was a deep emotional weight to the situation. The family, shocked and grieving, struggled to comprehend how someone so vibrant and full of life could be taken so suddenly. Friends and colleagues, many of whom had worked with him on films that touched millions of lives, were equally stunned. The autopsy report, while clinical in its description, revealed a story of sudden tragedy, one that rippled far beyond the walls of his home. It suggested a violent act that was brief yet impactful, leaving behind questions about motive, opportunity, and the sequence of events that led to his death. Authorities carefully documented every detail, understanding that these findings were just the first step in a larger investigation that would involve witnesses, security footage, and a meticulous review of Jason's daily life leading up to the incident. The preliminary autopsy report provided critical information that shaped the initial approach to the case, helping investigators identify potential timelines, interactions, and patterns of behavior that could explain what happened. It also highlighted the need to look beyond Jason's health and lifestyle, focusing instead on external factors that might have contributed to the tragedy. As news of the incident spread, fans reacted with shock, disbelief, and sadness, sharing memories of his films, public appearances, and activism. The autopsy findings, though technical, became the foundation for a public understanding of a sudden and violent loss that was both tragic and confusing. Every minor detail, from the abrasions on his hands to the absence of defensive injuries, painted a picture of a life abruptly interrupted, a family left to grieve, and a community struggling to reconcile the loss of someone who had seemed untouchable in both talent and vitality. Even at this early stage, it was clear that the story of Jason Reiner's death was more than just a medical report. It was the beginning of an investigation into a violent event that shook the foundations of everything around him, including those who were closest to him. Alongside the devastating news of Jason's death, the condition of his spouse, Michelle Reiner, added another layer of tragedy and complexity to the unfolding story. The preliminary autopsy revealed multiple serious injuries on Michelle, including clear defensive wounds, suggesting that she had attempted to protect herself during the attack. Investigators believe she was likely the first person confronted in the violent incident, and that her instinct to seek help or reach Jason placed her in the path of danger. These injuries, though serious, offered a glimpse into the chaos and fear that must have filled their home during the early hours of December 14th. The autopsy also helped establish a timeline, showing that both deaths occurred around the same time, which further emphasized the suddenness and unexpected nature of the event. Beyond the physical findings, authorities examined family dynamics to understand potential motives or triggers that could explain the incident. Interviews with friends, relatives, and neighbors indicated a household that had experienced emotional strain and tension, though these challenges were often mixed with love and support. Sources noted that while Jason and Michelle were dedicated to one another, like many families, they had moments of disagreement, stress, and unresolved conflict. Investigators were careful not to make assumptions, but they considered these details important in piecing together the environment in which the tragedy occurred. Meanwhile, the investigation focused on identifying individuals with the opportunity and proximity to commit the act. Security footage from nearby roads and surveillance cameras became a key tool. Investigators noticed erratic behavior from a person of interest, including attempts to avoid main highways and movements through quiet streets. These observations helped narrow down potential suspects and build a picture of someone trying to hide while under stress or panic. Small mistakes, such as briefly turning on a phone, provided authorities with crucial leads, demonstrating how even minor details could play a significant role in solving the case. Later that evening, the suspect was apprehended. Authorities described the arrest as quiet, with the individual exhausted and mentally unstable, offering no resistance. While this marked a significant step in the investigation, officials emphasized that understanding the full story would require more time, including interviews, forensic tests, and a complete review of the autopsy findings. For the family, this period was one of intense emotional upheaval. The combination of grief, shock, and unanswered questions created a situation that was difficult to navigate. Friends and loved ones provided support, yet the process of understanding what happened remained ongoing. The investigation also revealed how public attention could affect a personal tragedy. Fans, media, and colleagues expressed concern and sympathy, but their interest also created additional pressure on authorities to provide clear, factual updates without compromising the integrity of the investigation. The case highlighted the delicate balance between transparency and respect for privacy, as investigators worked to uncover the truth while honoring the Reiner family's experience. Every piece of evidence, from autopsy findings to security footage, helped form a comprehensive understanding of the incident. Investigators pieced together actions, reactions, and behaviors leading up to and during the event. forming a timeline that could help explain how a household once characterized by love and collaboration became the scene of a sudden and tragic loss. In doing so, authorities sought not just to assign responsibility, but also to provide closure for a family and a community left grappling with questions that may never fully be answered. This combination of medical, emotional, and investigative details created a story that was both complex and compelling, one that revealed the fragility of life, even for those who appeared strong, capable, and untouchable. The news of Jason Reiner's death and the preliminary findings from the autopsy sparked reactions that extended far beyond his immediate family. Fans, colleagues, and members of the filmmaking community expressed shock and disbelief, reflecting on his many contributions to the industry. Tributes poured in, highlighting not only his talent as a director and storyteller, but also his advocacy, generosity, and dedication to social causes. People who had never met him in person felt a connection through his films, his public appearances, and the values he had consistently shared with the world. As the details of the autopsy became known, the public gained a sense of the suddenness and violence of the event. The absence of defensive wounds on Jason and the serious injuries on Michelle illustrated a story that was both tragic and deeply unsettling. Commentators, journalists, and viewers alike grappled with the reality that life could change in an instant, even for someone whose career and public image suggested strength and resilience. This reflection prompted broader conversations about vulnerability, mental health, and the unpredictability of human behavior. It served as a reminder that fame, success, and recognition do not shield anyone from tragedy or loss. At the same time, the ongoing investigation, which included reviewing security footage, interviewing witnesses, and examining family context, underscored the importance of meticulous, methodical work in understanding such incidents. Authorities repeatedly stressed that the case was far from closed, and that each new detail added another piece to the puzzle rather than a final answer. The narrative also drew attention to the delicate interplay between public interest and private grief. While many wanted immediate information and updates, the need to respect the family's mourning process was paramount. News outlets balanced reporting with sensitivity, often emphasizing the preliminary nature of findings, while providing context about the investigative process. In parallel, discussions arose about legacy, memory, and the ways in which people remember those who pass suddenly. Jason Reiner's life, filled with professional achievements, personal relationships, and public impact, became a focal point for reflection on the fragility and unpredictability of life. Fans and colleagues shared stories of moments that captured his humanity, humor, and kindness, painting a portrait of someone whose influence extended far beyond the screen. Despite the sadness surrounding his passing, the focus on legacy offered a form of solace. It reminded the public that even in the face of tragedy, the contributions one makes through art, advocacy, and everyday acts of care continue to resonate. Ultimately, the story of Jason Reiner's death, his family's ordeal, and the unfolding investigation offered lessons about empathy, awareness, and the impermanence of life. It challenged assumptions about security, happiness, and control, illustrating that tragedy can touch anyone, anywhere, at any time. For viewers, the narrative combined suspense, emotional depth, and reflection, showing that understanding human behavior, family dynamics, and societal response requires patience, attention, and compassion. As authorities continued their work and the family